I'm
All
recording.
right, recording. Well, Megan, do you want to introduce Courtney and Brad, or because you're having problems, do you want someone else to do that? Okay, silence. I think that means
Can you hear me now?
I can, yes.
Okay. Yeah, if you wanted to go ahead and introduce them, that would be great.
Okay, I'll step in. I wasn't prepared. I'm not prepared. So, two of the people that we are hearing from tonight are Courtney Cottrell, who is the hippo, the historical preservation officer for the Brothertown Indian Tribe of Wisconsin, and Brad Dubois, who is a graduate student who is working on a dissertation that includes information on Samson Occom, one of our founders, and his relationship to shape note singing and other spiritual songs. So I think we're starting off with Courtney. So take it away.
Sure. I was asked to talk about why we have to get permission from the tribe when we have researchers, and to have researchers constantly in contact with the tribe so that their work is sort of vetted in a way, and not in a bad way. So this is just going to be brief unless you have questions afterwards. And the reason why we do this is because we want to make sure that our image is consistent, and especially we want firm self-representation from the tribe in whatever other people are putting out about the tribe. So that's why we're doing it. I'm not quite sure what else to say about it. I'll just field any questions that you want, unless you have something that you want me to talk about in particular.
Well, what is the process, Courtney?
Sure. So the process is normally any researcher can contact the tribe, and I have been working with most of them just because I'm also an academic. So Brad, you and I have been emailing back and forth, so you already know this. But I worked until about last week. I was at the University of Illinois. Now I'm in a museum, but I've been in academia for probably 11 years now. And I've done a lot of research. I have my dissertations, and I worked with a bunch of tribes in the Midwest. So our process is really modeled after what these other tribes are doing. So a lot of it has to do with asking permission, writing a proposal, getting it approved by the council so that they know what's going on. If they want to make changes, they can. They have never made changes to a research project. We have asked, there's one thing that keeps creeping up in a lot of these research projects about the Brothertown not being accepting of slaves or Black individuals in history. And the reason why we are constantly trying to get this sort of edited is because it's not given the entire history of why, or given the reasons why. And Megan's been a big help with that, trying to help me find sort of the treaty with the Oneidas and what says, this is why it is the way it is. And so once that gets approved, then the researcher can go off and do their thing. And they usually contact me a couple times because I spend a lot of time editing everything and looking over, doing just grammatical things and making sure dates are right and everything like that. And then I send it back. So that's really the process. At the end, a couple people have asked for letters for grants. So we can write letters with grants saying that the council approved this research project. It helps them get money faster, right? It makes your grant stronger. And then also people have asked for things like notes for publications of the article so that you can have a little blurb with it, or even for your dissertation, if you so choose, you can ask to have a letter from council saying this was approved, and then your dissertation committee is okay with it. So that's usually the process.
Does anybody have any questions for Courtney on this system?
I have a question. So as Courtney, as we were corresponding, like at a certain point you said, it's probably a good idea to put together an MOU.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, how do you determine when that is the necessary step, or like how engaged does the research have to be before that becomes a part of the process?
Yeah, I usually like to say if your research is like 60%, over the 50% mark using either tribal archives or it's about the tribe, then we do a memorandum of understanding. And really that is just because we want to have a copy of it. So it's a legal sort of contract that says we're going to get a copy of everything at the end so that we have it for our archives and other people can use it as well. Because you're putting all this work into it. It can come at any time if you want to do it at the beginning of the project, in the middle. We don't usually like it towards the end. But yeah, it's usually if the majority of whatever you're writing or whatever research you're doing is on the Brothertown, we'll write up a contract that just says, you're doing this, it's okay, and this is what we get in return.
Any other questions for Courtney? Hey.
Hey.
Gabriel?
I am audible unmuted. Yes? Hello?
We can hear you.
Yep. Good, thanks. Hello. Is it possible to, I might be the odd guy out where this could be of interest or matter. Is it possible, is it reasonable, is it helpful, is it friendly to go ahead and make such an MOU memorandum after the fact, after something that has been going on, is still going on, that we ought to just be all keeping in touch about anyway? Any possibility of that sort of process?
Yeah, I've never done it after the project has been done, but I would definitely I think most of us would be open to doing it just, so that we know that it was there. We can, slip something in there as to why it was done afterwards, or, we want to do it this way now.
I mean, nothing's actually done. I'm in progress still, but I've made heavy. I traveled to Wisconsin and to use the Brothertown collection, so graciously acquired and curated by the Oneida. Thanks, and I just had a wonderful time there and all over Fond du Lac and just everything. And thank you again for giving me access, nick of time. That was crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so this can all be sidebar private. I should follow up better some of that stuff. I might still have some better photos than others do of some of what's in there, and I have.
Yeah, that would be great because we
a few items stand out to me that I would like to say, though, this is really special. Oh, I know this name and this matters because, and I could point out a couple things. And
for sure. I will contact you. We're supposed to be getting that collection back soon.
Oh, really? Oh,
yes.
yay.
I've been working on it to get it back. Yes. So when that happens, I will definitely hit you up so that we can put more in our records for everything.
Especially then, but I don't know. Is Reggie still paying attention to it? Should I?
Not really. No.
That's totally reasonable in circumstances you explain. That's great news.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you.
But for that also, you wouldn't need an MOU from us because we already have an MOU with Oneida and says that once it's okay with us that we okay a researcher, then it's fine.
Right.
So,
yeah, I felt like there was I didn't know the details, but great. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Courtney, could you just explain where that process is with the Brothertown collection?
Yeah. It's been quite a few years that I've been trying to get it back. It was a lot of money, right? And instead of just, it's going to be a gift, a nation-to-nation gift is what it's going to be. And we're going to do it at a powwow, which is wonderful, to sort of make it public. So those dates will come hopefully pretty soon. And it's just because, to free up space and not have it taking up money there.
Their history department just got moved recently. Yeah, so this is a complication, and this would especially be helpful for them at this time in particular. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, that's great news.
It is all around.
Any
it's
other
on the down low though, so that's not like we shouldn't be advertising it yet.
Mum's the word.
Yes.
Courtney, with these documents and the historical documents that we already have for our tribe, do we have any plans for keeping these in some type of, say, airtight, not container, well, I want to say container, but that's not the right word, but preserving these documents from the atmosphere so they don't further deteriorate? We have plans for that already?
Yes, so the agreement that I made, the MOU that I wrote for Oneida for this collection was that we would also pay for the supplies to put them in archival boxes. And they have done that. So we'll get the archival boxes with everything in it already. And then our museum is basically in Fond du Lac in the Bank Center is pretty temperature controlled. So it's as good as we can get it right now, you know. Yeah, so they're as well preserved as any other archives that the Oneidas have, which I can say because I've worked on the archives. So.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Courtney? Okay, drum roll. I think it's time we heard from Brad. Please introduce yourself and what you're doing, and we'll go from there.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Brad Dubos. I'm a fourth-year PhD student in Northwestern University in Chicago. And as part of my dissertation research, I'm working on Samson Occom and his 1774 hymnal. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about how that project started out and kind of where it's been evolving and changing over the course of the last few months to kind of give you an idea of where it's headed, not just where it's come from. But first of all, thank you so much for being here and giving up some of your evening. I really appreciate it. And a special thanks to Megan for organizing and to Courtney for already sharing with us some info about researcher-tribe relationships. I also wanted to recognize that today's July 14th, and it is the 227th anniversary of Samson Occom's death. So I just wanted to recognize that and just say I'm beyond honored to be able to talk today about some of his achievements in his life, and it's just great to be able to be here to remember him on a day like this. Okay, so I'll jump in. I'm working on Samson Occom's 1774 hymnal, and I just have a printout. So it's not the book itself, but this is what the cover page looks like. And it has a really long title. It's a choice collection of hymns and spiritual songs intended for the edification of sincere Christians of all denominations. So I'm just going to call it the collection from now on, if that's okay. Great. And so as you may know, Occom spent many, many years collecting hymns. And in this collection, he compiled 109 numbered hymns in here. So it's a lot of songs in there from more than 15 writers that we know of. There are also a number of hymns in there whose authorship is not known for certain. And at least one hymn that we know was written by Reverend Occom himself. So what I find really important about the hymnal and kind of the backbone of the research that I'm doing is the time that it was published in 1774, right as the Brothertown movement is gaining momentum, and plans for the migration are really progressing. So I'm going to talk a little bit and share with you how I'm analyzing the hymnal, and it's through its focus on place. Throughout the hymnal, there's this recurring focus on the ways that communities navigate places together. And it just seems so resonant with Brothertown's history that I really wanted to explore why we see this focus on place again and again in the hymnal and what Occom might have been doing with that. So I'm going to tell you kind of about my starting point as a literary studies scholar. I should have said that in my introduction, but I'm in the English department. So that's sort of my background and where I'm coming from in approaching the hymns very much as poetry. And so the questions that I was initially posing were very text-based and also very focused on the specific settlement of Brothertown, New York, so the specific late 18th century moment in this place. And I've been interested in figuring out what the hymnal can tell us about Brothertown people's lived experiences of that settlement, given its interest in place and placemaking. So since the hymnal is so concerned with place, what can it tell us about this very real place that was such a core of what made the Brothertown tribe what it is in its formative years? So I'm asking questions like, what was it like to journey to this land, Brothertown, New York? What was it like to turn it into a home and build it into a home, to move through it every day? And how can the hymnal kind of illuminate some of those ways of relating to that place? But not just that, I'm also interested in thinking about how the hymnal contributed to shaping that space of Brotherton, and kind of was a part of carving out a place for the community there. And I'll go into detail about what that looks like. So I'm going to share with you how I'm approaching these questions and where they've led me so far. But after that, near the end, I'll share how those questions are continuing to change and how my approach has been changing over the last few months since I've been able to connect with different Brothertown community members and open a dialogue and non-tribal researchers. Some of you are here that I've been talking to, so I want to be able to show that these conversations have really had an impact on me and the way that I'm thinking through these questions and learning to ask different questions. So I'll talk about that a little bit at the end. So let's dive into the hymnal. So I'm coming at it again from like an English background, a very close reading approach. So I focus a lot on the textual elements of the hymnal. So closely looking at the lyrics of the hymns, thinking about the editorial choices that Samson Occom was making as he put together all of these different hymns from different people. And so I want to kind of talk about what this approach can help us understand. And I think particularly it can tell us a lot about Occom's vision of Brothertown as a place, the kind of place that he envisioned that it would become. So I won't be making claims about everyone who lived there, people coming from different parent tribes, different goals, desires, different reasons, right? So this is very much about Occom and kind of his vision. And through the hymnal, Occom is kind of cluing us into some of the orientations involved in creating Brothertown as a place. And orientation is sort of my key term into the hymnal. So I'm going to explain what I mean by that. So what's orientation? By that I mean the ways we kind of simply physically move through space, our position in relation to different things, the way that just our bodies are moving around. But in a more general sense, it's also the experience of living in a certain place or inhabiting it, and the ways we kind of settle into a place, the ways that we turn an unfamiliar or strange place into home. When we become oriented in a place, we feel at home there. So you might think about this in terms of if you've ever moved to a new house. It takes a while for your body to kind of become used to where all the light switches are and how many steps are on the staircase, and maybe in your bones you still are used to the old place, right? And it takes a while to orient yourself and adjust to a new place. So that's how I'm thinking about orientation, and it's a really I think important process when talking about Brothertown history, not only for the move to New York, but subsequent moves and search for different places, different homes, and this focus on travel that we see in the various migrations. This process of orienting oneself in relation to place, it appears again and again as a very important concern in Occom's writings. So I wanted to share a journal entry with you that you might be familiar with. This is, Occom wrote this on November 7th, 1785. And this is the day when he says that Brothertown was formally established as a town. And let me find the right page real quick. So in this journal entry, he's describing establishing Brothertown, and he tells us that the town trustees were appointed, other town officials were appointed, and then the very next thing that he tells us is that the central cross street for the settlement was established. And I'm going to read a few lines from his journal. Concluded to have a center near David Fowler's house, the main street is to run north and south and east and west, to cross at the center. Concluded to live in peace and in friendship, and to go on in all their public concerns in harmony, both in their religious and temporal concerns, and everyone to bear his part of public charges in the town. They desired me to be a teacher amongst them. I consented to spend some of my remaining with them and make this town my home and center. So what I want to first point out is that we get an account of the spatial organization in the settlement's sort of first moments in this journal entry, and we get these streets that are going to be literally orienting how people move across the settlement, right? It's establishing, here's the town center, and here are the streets that are running along the compass cardinal directions, north, south, east, west. And alongside that, we get a different kind of orientation established through the appointment of leadership. And Occom talks about also being a teacher in Brothertown. So we have this literal, here are the roads, right? Here's how we're going to move around, but also the more figurative dimension of orientation, leadership kind of guiding and guiding Brothertown people. And he uses words like center and harmony in that journal entry that really emphasize that sense of orientation. But where I think it really gets cool is this is also where Occom first gives us the Algonquin name for Brothertown. Embrace yourselves for my attempt. Ia Kwitu Wakanuk. And he tells us this is also the day when they gave the town this name. So streets established, leadership established, Brothertown. And there are differing translations for this word, but one that really speaks to me is Stephanie Fielding's translation. She's the Mohegan tribal linguist, and she translates it as, he does so like someone looking in a certain direction. He does so like someone looking in a certain direction. So the name suggests that Brotherton Indians become a community. You become brothers of the name by sharing a direction, standing side by side. Or in the term that I'm using, sharing an orientation. And this makes sense both literally in that, so they're coming from 7 parent tribes. They're all moving from the East Coast to New York. So this literal common direction in the migration, but also, again, more figuratively as sort of attitude or inclination, a way of life that's being shared by this new community. So why do I bring this up? There's also a persistent focus on direction and place in the hymnal, in Occom's collection. And the deeper I get into researching it, the clearer and clearer that it becomes to me that Occom viewed this hymnal as a really key part of fostering that shared direction that's built into the name of Brotherton. And that shared orientation, again, that's built into the very name. He wanted this book to bring people together, right? He wanted it to guide them in walking a common path. And to the point where I've taken to calling it not just a text, but it's a compass or a map, I think, in Occom's eyes. So to illustrate this so that I'm not just making this up, I'll read a little bit of Occom's own words from the preface to the hymnal. So he wrote a short preface before the hymns, and this is a part of it. Here I present you, O Christians, of what denomination soever, with cordial hymns, to comfort you in your weary pilgrimage, I hope they will assist and strengthen you through the various changes of this life, till you shall all safely arrive to the general assembly above. This trope of the weary pilgrimage appears in the preface. And certainly Occam's drawing on biblical imagery, familiar biblical imagery, this idea of kind of walking a road with other Christians through faith, and we're all going to end up in the same place, right? Heaven. We're all headed in the same direction. But on the other hand, it also evokes an important element of Mohegan spiritual tradition, the life trail. And Melissa Tantagwidgen-Zobel's written a lot about this, the Mohegan tribal historian, about the life trail and how it's incorporated into traditional Mohegan designs, basketry, beadwork, and how it represents the journey through life. So by invoking this weary pilgrimage, Occam is certainly drawing from Christian tradition, certainly drawing from Mohegan tradition, but what I really want to emphasize is that this weary pilgrimage also anticipates a very specific journey, a very real journey. So Occam published the collection in April 1774, and just 3 months later, in July, he journeyed to the site of Brothertown to survey the Oneida lands that had just been granted to the Brotherton tribes. So as he's putting this together, he's planning to travel there just a few months afterwards, and of course planning the bigger move for the parent tribes. So as plans for the settlement were going into motion, one of the audiences that Occam was certainly speaking to were the Brotherton Indians, and it's hard to imagine him not kind of thinking of that and invoking that as he talks about this pilgrimage, when he's literally himself kind of moving back and forth between these places. And so in offering these hymns as a comfort in their weary pilgrimage, he says, till you all shall all safely arrive to the general assembly above, well, also till they shall all safely arrive to their new home, right, in Brothertown. So before I get into the hymns themselves, I wanted to say, so yes, these hymns have biblical meanings. Yes, they contain themes and subjects that someone who never heard the name Brothertown could understand. There are people in England singing these hymns at this time, many of these hymns. But they also deal with themes and images and concerns that were very relevant to the Brotherton tribes and the southern New England tribes who would become Brotherton, who were already singing these hymns. And I do want to point out, Joanna Brooks has really convincingly shown, I think, that Occam kept these communities, these southern New England tribal communities in mind while he was putting together the collection and creating the hymnal. So I'm definitely indebted to her work, and she's already been hosted here by Brothertown Forward, so you've gotten to hear her brilliance. But what I'm trying to do is build on that and think specifically about how the hymnal speaks to lived realities of place that were really incredibly pressing for Occam and the communities that he was planning with for this move. And so I'm going to take us through a few hymns to think about what they can suggest about how Occam envisioned Brothertown as a place in two respects. One, as a destination for a journey, the endpoint of that pilgrimage, and then secondly, as a future home. So as a place, Brothertown, the meaning of it, I think, changes as the people who are moving toward it finally arrive and start to build it into their home. So first, I'll talk about Brothertown as a destination and what the hymnal can illuminate about the way it functions as a destination. So throughout the hymns, there are lots of different journeys through all kinds of different places. There's journeys through deserts, through valleys. There's a really interesting hymn that takes us into Christ's wound in his side on the cross. There's just lots of interesting journeying happening in the hymnal. There are paths and trails and roads just everywhere throughout it. So in the context of the coming Brothertown migration, singing about these journeys would have had a special relevance for the Brothertown tribes. I mean, they were living these realities of travel and navigation. Making their way toward a new place wasn't just a song; it was, real, and it was quickly becoming absolutely necessary. So journeys are everywhere in the hymnal, but what I'm very interested in is how Occom arranges and orders hymns in particular ways to promote certain kinds of journeying over others. And by placing certain hymns together and including certain hymns in ordering them, different patterns emerge that I'm going to gesture toward here in just a second. And for interest of time, I'm not going to talk about this, but if there's interest, I can talk about it later while we're discussing. But yes, there were limits to like the hymns that Occom had access to, but we can be sure that he was being thoughtful and had control over the way he was arranging them in the book, and that's something I could speak to possibly later. But it's striking to me that many of the earliest hymns in the collection, sort of when you first open it, if you were going to go through it in order, they're the darkest and they're the most dismal hymns. In the preface, Occom calls this cluster awakening and alarming hymns, and they're very alarming, certainly. So one example is hymn 7, which is Isaac Watts's composition, and it's all about being cast into hell. So it has lines like, here's a few lines: the land of horror and despair, eternal plagues and heavy chains, tormenting racks and fiery coals. So not a pleasant place, right? But definitely very much invested in describing this place. So there's lots of hymns like this that are alarming, as Occom puts it, and they reference sin, punishment, God's wrath, but most importantly for our focus here, wandering. There's so much wandering in these early hymns. And sinners are depicted as wanderers over and over again, wanderers who have strayed from God's path. And what's really interesting is these sinners can't sing well. The hymns make a point that not only are these sinners lost and alone, but they can only moan or give out discordant cries or forced notes. They're again and again they just can't worship properly. And by pulling lots of hymns together that kind of make this point, early on in the hymnal, Occom is kind of creating this association early on between wandering and corrupt worship or inauthentic worship. And as we get further into the hymnal, we get much more uplifting hymns, and they contrast this wandering with pilgrimage, a different kind of journey, and the kind that Occom is valuing here. And a pilgrimage appears as a steady and directed journey with other people. So unlike the sinner, you're not alone wandering. You're with other people who are headed to the same place and who have the same orientation as you. So to show you this, I just wanted to show you two hymns that he puts right next to each other to kind of make a point, I think. These are hymns 36 and 37 in the collection. And the first one is another one by Isaac Watts. And this hymn follows a pilgrimage of the saints, it says. This is a pilgrimage of the saints. And they're journeying through this poisonous and dangerous land, but they're doing it together. And I'm going to read some lines from it, and I won't sing it because I can't. I'll read it like poetry. By glimmering hopes and gloomy fears, we trace the sacred road. Through dismal deeps and dangerous snares, we make our way to God. Our journey is a thorny maze, but we march upward still. So you get that sense of the we, or the collective here. We trace, we make our way to God, we march upward. And in the very next hymn, which they run, they share a page, so they run into the same page. Occom pulls in a hymn from a different author, John Sennick. So he's putting together these two hymns by different people, but by putting them in conversation, he's revealing something new. So this next hymn starts like this. He heads it the Pilgrim Song. Children of the heavenly King, as ye journey, sweetly sing your Savior's worthy praise. So we get this whole hymn about pilgrimage, and right after it, we get this very straightforward connection between journeying and the pilgrimage and singing together. And just to kind of show you here, so the first part that I read from hymn 36 is here, and then down here we get the Pilgrim Song. So by putting these so close together on this shared page, I think that Occom is really winking at us. I think that he's reminding us that, okay, this hymnal, it's guiding your voice, right? It's giving you the words to sing, but it's also meant to guide your steps. To journey is to sing is to journey. And reminding, singers that this hymnal is instilling a particular orientation or direction, sense of direction in them through the songs and performances that it's facilitating for them. So the hymns, especially in the first 40 pages or so, they keep making this distinction between wandering and pilgrimage. And I think this opposition really points to what was at stake for Occom in the migration. Will we be wanderers or pilgrims? And I think Occom is telling a story using these editorial choices that he's making to put these hymns in particular order. I think he's saying, the wandering in these early hymns, it gives us this horrible vision of just being scattered and lost. No, we will not be like that, right? We will not be wanderers. We do have a sense of direction. And, through the careful planning and organization going into the Brothertown movement, and through this, these hymns that I'm gifting to you to comfort you, right? Through these things, we're going to stick together and create a place of our own. We are not going to lose one another. We're not going to wander. So that's how I think one way that the hymnal can kind of point out interesting ways that for Occom, what Brothertown meant as a destination, that he was integral in helping people move toward. But I also want to speak briefly about, okay, what happens once the travelers reach Brothertown? How do they fashion it into a home? And I think that the hymnal can also illuminate some of those dimensions of place. And I have just a few examples of that as well. So as Reverend Occom presents it in his journals, we have lots of journal entries from his first initial visit after Brothertown had been settled in 1785. So this is 11 years after the hymnal's been published. Occom's finally gotten to kind of see the fruits of all his and the other founders' labor. And according to his journal, hymn singing was so integral to turning this sort of like new and unfamiliar place into a home. And he's so excited to see singing everywhere, to see so much singing. And he writes about how people sang at Sunday meetings, they sang in neighbors' homes, they sang while husking corn. Hymnody just seems to infuse the whole entire place. And just one example that I really love, Occom writes about how he officiated the first wedding ceremony at Brothertown, and it ends with a hymn. And he seems very approving that when the singers leave, they walk straight home. He says they disperse without any carousing or frolicking. So in this very simple sense, he's very he's very interested in the ways that singing kind of orients people in that sort of both literal sense, right? They're not zigzagging and wayward. But more importantly and more broadly, his journals show that hymn singing really coordinated shared orientations, that shared direction between the people at Brothertown by influencing how they moved around the settlement. Through his journals, we get so many details about how often, where, and when they congregated to sing. And we constantly get these scenes of people coming together and congregating to sing and then dispersing and going home or going to their next task. And it creates these patterns of movement across the settlement that Occom comes to become visible to Occom through these hymn singing practices. And I think it's so interesting that in his journal we never get he never sits down and gives us this systematic layout of Brothertown, this is where this is and that, and this is how everything's set up. He doesn't do that. His sense of the place kind of surfaces as people are moving from singing place to singing place, and as he's making note of it. So in one example, this is on October 28th, 1785, Occom is having back pain, so he stays at David Fowler's house, but he writes, and this is a quote, "The young folks went in the evening to Abraham Simon's, a mile off from David Fowler's, to sing." It seems pretty, everyday kind of comment, but this is the only place where we get this information about this mile between the Simon house and the Fowler house. We get this coordinate that gives us a little bit of insight into how Brothertown was laid out and set up as the distance between two places where you sing, right? This is why Occom chooses to give us this information. And so through weeks of journaling in these 1785 late 1785 months, the sort of contours of the settlement, the shape, the pathways across it, they become gradually more visible and take shape as Occom is describing these patterns of moving between singing meetings. And I really love this. It's not until the end of his third week at Brothertown, so he's been there for 3 weeks, he finally kind of stops and gives a short visual impression. And he writes, "Looked about a little to see the land, and it is the best land I ever did see in all my travels." So pretty straightforward and pretty short. It's funny because he's been journaling for weeks about all the singing that he's heard across the town, and only now does his sense of sight seem to catch up. He's been listening so far. He's been listening, and only now does he kind of look around and see the land. And I think that the way that Occom was experiencing this place and recording his experiences speaks a lot to the power of hymn singing as a placemaking activity. The ways that people moved through the settlement, the way that Occom experienced this place was so tied to hymn singing. And I think I'm going to wrap up pretty shortly. I want to just kind of tell you a little bit about sort of those descriptions that I just gave are kind of the research that has come out of my literary studies angle and the stuff that was kind of felt kind of natural to me as someone who looks at poetry and studies poetry. But this approach has limits, and so I wanted to talk a little bit about the limits and how I'm reframing and rethinking some of the project. So one limit is that it's very archive-centric. I mean, my approach has been very focused on texts, the hymnal, the journals, and this has a way of kind of implicitly privileging written knowledge over other kinds of knowledge. And it has, there's also, a history of voices excluded from the archive. Access to the archive is unequal. So there are those things to contend with. And then a second limitation of this approach is giving a satisfactory account of the present day relevance of this kind of research. And I think it's a challenge for, all historical researchers, but it seems to me especially pertinent for research about the Brothertown Indian Nation to tie historical examples of cultural practice and sovereignty to continued expressions of cultural practices and sovereignty today. So because of those limits, that's why I think the kind of cross-collaboration that Courtney was talking about is so essential and has been so reorienting to me and helping me think about how to extend beyond the written archive and also reframing my work to speak to the present in a more in a richer and kind of more honest way. And so I was very honed in on the specific moment in time and the specific text, this hymnal. But after connecting with different community members within the tribe, just whole new dimensions have opened up, and especially finding out about this longer trajectory of Brothertown hymnody and shape note singing that I had no idea about. And I was already new, as I started working on this, I was already new to learning about Occom and Brothertown. So it's so wonderful to learn that there's so much more to this story. It's also intimidating, of course, to find out how much is out there and how much there is to still know. But it's been, being able to talk to such gracious and generous people, again, including the people here, it just really helped me to broaden my perspective and kind of fill in the horizon around that moment that I was so kind of honed in on and as I started my research. So now I'm kind of reframing the work that I'm doing to think about, okay, how does Occom's influence continue after his lifetime, right? And why does that matter? Not just for the legacy of Brothertown as a nation, but for this cultural practice of hymn singing that's still carried on by some Brothertown people. And I won't say too much more about it because Gabriel especially has already talked on filling in those gaps after Occom, but I'll just kind of, in the way of a few tidbits, just mention that Indian Melodies, Thomas Cummings, is that backwards on the screen?
No, that's fine.
Oh, great. Yeah, it looks backwards on mine. So this 1845 tune book, the ways that we can kind of still see Occom in it and kind of still see that influence moving into the 19th century. So something as simple as one of the titles that Kumuk includes is Occom. So he titles his tunes by the names of native people and places and tribes. And that was a way of honoring Reverend Occom. And then another example is the Old Indian Hymn. And there are verses that are included in this hymn are also appear in the collection in Occom 1774 hymnal, and Occom was the first to publish them in print in America. So there's this kind of direct link where Kumuk is kind of citing and relying on Occom. Yes.
If I might just add even a stronger detail backing up the basic gist of what you're saying, it's also a text which almost uniquely in the larger Thomas Kumuk volume is not attributed and is not drawn from the standard Methodist hymnal of the day. So it seems to have, not come from how he sourced almost everything, and that's another sort of indirect evidence of a likelihood of just having come from memory of the past, from being carried in the travels, from Malcolm's production to even all the way to Wisconsin.
Yeah, great point. Thank you. Okay, I think I'm almost done. I'll just give you a few of the new questions that I'm formulating after chapter, the kind of a more collaborative approach that I've been trying to take. So as kind of Occom is carried into Indian melodies, and as Occom is carried into hymn singing events that are happening today and just sort of being brought to life again, questions that go beyond Occom's lifetime are becoming increasingly important to me. So I've written a few down. One is that as the Brothertown Indian Nation's relationship to place has shifted in complicated ways, what forms of placemaking and community building have been important? So if I was trying to account for this one moment in this one text, how do we see placemaking and community building changing as place changes, and as the tribe changes, and as culture changes? And how might hymnody continue to be a resource for Brothertown placemaking and for community building? So next steps for me are really foregrounding Brothertown sovereignty today, spiritual sovereignty, political sovereignty, territorial sovereignty, and asking, okay, how does hymn singing express or affirm these types of sovereignty? That seems to me the most important question of why should we be talking about the hymns? And so next steps for me are understanding more about how Brothertown is understanding its sovereignty today, and what part Brothertown hymnody as this particular cultural expression could or should play in that understanding. And I think I'll leave it there. I've talked for quite a while, and I'd be happy to hear any questions or thoughts about historical stuff, present day, comments about present day stuff. I'm really open to anything.
Okay, folks, anybody have questions for Brad? I'm sorry.
I have a question. Brad, I really appreciate you taking the time in your life to investigate these questions. I like hearing your perspective and how you're approaching it. How did it come about? How did you find out about Occom, and what inspired you to take on the task?
Yeah. So a few years ago, I was trying to figure out a dissertation topic, and doing just kind of like broad reading. And I'm very interested in poetry, American poetry in the 18th and 19th centuries. And so I was just reading as much of that as I could find. And I was particularly interested in place already, and kind of specifically like spaces where different religious experiences unfold, or where sort of religion and spirituality are important elements of understanding that place. So I looked at a lot of poets who kind of either come out of a Christian tradition or speak about their different experiences in any number of religions. And I don't remember exactly how I found the hymnal. I think maybe one of my advisors recommended it. And I was just really taken by how attuned it was to the importance of places, to the ways that we experience religious meanings and religion in our lives. And I thought, I have to include this, but I didn't even know about the Brothertown story or Occom's Brothertown affiliations at that point. When his writings are taught, it's usually his Moses Paul sermon or his autobiography, and his Moheganness is very emphasized when those texts are taught. So I just became very excited by finding out the context of the hymnal, and it's a very different relationship and story than the other poems and poetry that I'm looking at. The ways that this hymnal is so intimately tied to this birth of this, new nation. And so I thought, I have to I have to write about that. And originally I was actually writing a chapter about Samson Occom and Phyllis Wheatley. And I know Megan and Gabriel, I've talked a little bit about that with you, because there are so many interesting connections between them beyond just the famous letter that Phyllis Wheatley sent to Occom. But it became too big. Like there's so much to say about Occom and Brothertown that it's its own thing now.
Cool.
Any other questions? Yes, Gabriel, go ahead.
Just in opener timing, I apologize, and Courtney especially, for my earlier clumsy entry. I think I misunderstood start timing and blam, but thank you all so much. Now I'll catch up in video later.
Okay. Any other questions?
It's maybe not a question, but more of a comment. Brad, I know that you and Megan have talked about, going out to Brothertown and for you to be able to meet some of the folks who are at the Historical Society there. It is a wonderful place to be. And I hope that you will get to go there. And whether or not I'm able to join you, it's moving. It's really moving to be there and to be in those spaces and to remember those stories. I'm not a singer myself, but I would love to hear those songs being sung again in that space.
Anyway. I do definitely hope to go in August, and maybe we can be in touch to see if it will line up or not. But I'm definitely still planning to make it.
Good.
Cool.
Okay.
And if there aren't any questions, I'd even just love to hear people's experiences or non-experiences with hymn singing, with the 2018 Sing and Share at New Haven and some others that have happened since. Does that, have any of you gone? And does that interest you? Does it is it something that you are hoping to participate in? I'm just curious, especially we're all in different time zones, right? How much cross communication is happening about some of this, some of the more recent hymn singing stuff.
I attended the New Haven Shape Note Singing event, and I too am not a singer, and I was sick at the time, so it was an interesting event, and it was impressive in that it's something that I want to see happen with Brothertown descendants going forward. Mm-hmm. And Megan and Amy and myself and several other people are involved with an independent nonprofit organization called Calumet and Cross Heritage Society. And one of the things that we're interested is promoting shape note singing among Brothertown Indian descendants. So one of our plans is in 2020 to have a day-long shape note singing event at the Union Cemetery in Brothertown, Wisconsin. Mm. So that's something we're in planning stage of, and hopefully we'll be able to complete that and work on other events to continue promoting I can't even say it, shape note singing among Brothertown descendants. Anybody else want to talk about that or anything else regarding?
Well, I know that there have been singings at the tribe, right? At the Bink, the tribal headquarters, and also in Minnesota. And so I think that there are more and more instances of us going through Kamuk's book, and participating in these singings in ways that are new. Not these exact hymns, but, you know, my family is from northern Wisconsin, and we went to a tiny little mission church, and my family sat on one side of that mission church and another family sat on the other side of the mission church. And the thing that is remarkable is the amount of singing that happened in that tiny little space, and how much the singing was a big part of my family every week. And then in the summers, going to Indian church camp, how singing was a big part of that too. And I'm still a horrible singer. But that is a big part of sort of shared experiences that I had with not only my nuclear family, but then my extended family, and then sort of the greater community in and around that little town.
And the one thing I would add is that it's getting traction overseas. Maybe not sings are happening or, you know, live music, but at least there are articles that are coming out. I know one, maybe, was it Gabriel? Were you the one who put me in contact with? Somebody put me in contact with somebody that I had to read his article, and it was in French, and I don't know French. So, but it was published in France. So that's
I
another
think
thing.
I know the reference, and yeah, maybe, yeah.
So.
Je parle en français?
Ich spreche Deutsch.
They did have a singing there then in Australia as well. They were singing Kamuk's tunes in Australia.
Wow. I was just in New Zealand. I could have hopped the pond right there. And
that would be our valiant alto, yeah? In Australia. Paul, I haven't heard from you. I'm curious, you're like grappling with Occom.
I have no microphone.
We hear you now.
We hear you.
Yeah, we hear you now.
Oh, you're out. I'm not sure.
I
Okay.
see a little mute icon.
Could be stuck.
Any other questions or comments?
I think Greg said he was going to sing a hymn for us before we get off.
Greg doesn't sing well. No, Greg, I'm told I do sing well, but Greg doesn't like to sing. But
I
Only by
hear
myself.
the resonant voice.
I'd like to thank both Brad and Courtney for taking the time. I found this to be very interesting. I want to know more. I'd like to learn more and more what you come up with, Brad, and moving forward, how we can help you as a tribe, as individuals. We're well represented here, I think, and there's a lot more people out there that can help you, moving on.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll be continuing to share as it continues to develop. So thank you.
Yeah.
Cool.
Any other comments or questions?
Oh.
All right. Well, thank you, Courtney. Thank you, Brad. This, again,
you.
was very
Thank you.
and appreciate your taking the time to share with us.
Yep,
Yeah,
great,
thank you,
thoughtful
everyone.
stuff. Thanks.